After Deadline, the media podcast. I'm Kathy Fowler.
And I'm Mark Silverstein.
We are former TV news reporters who turned to the dark side and now work as PR and marketing gurus.
Get ready to have your mind blown because we have a very fascinating guest who is focusing on homelessness. Right now, homelessness in Seattle is his one and only beat. And what he has to say will really open your eyes. He has over 20 years of experience as a journalist. He's currently a senior fellow and journalist at Discovery Institute. And before that, he found himself surrounded by controversy for his coverage of a highly politically charged event. A fascinating guy. We're excited to welcome Jonathan Choe to the show.
Jonathan, a journalist with the cause. You work for Discovery Institute, covering the homeless crisis in Seattle and nationally. You're a senior fellow at Discovery Institute, and you get to focus on underreported issues that many media outlets are unable to cover. Why do you think this coverage is so important to you, and how did you get involved in making sure that you're able to dive deeper into some important issues?
Yeah, it's not only unable, it's they don't want to cover it. So those are the types of stories that have always intrigued me in my 20 plus year career. And for your audience who may not know, I've worked in mainstream media, at NBC, ABC, Fox, Tribune. I've been on air in Chicago, Minneapolis, my hometown of Boston, and now in Seattle. And, I ended up at the ABC affiliate at Como a couple of years ago, but fast forward to now, and we can get into my backstory a little bit later. But I'm here at Discovery Institute as a senior fellow and journalist, but forget about the titles. I'm this kid from Boston who barely got out of college. So it's kind of funny to think that I'm at a think tank, to go more in depth on these issues. But I am thankful because it's probably the first time in my career where I've had this opportunity now to take deeper dives. Look, you guys are former journalists. You know how long it takes to put an investigative piece together. It takes time, money, resources. And right now with the state of journalism and consolidation, investigative units are being cut left and right. It's about the daily grind, right? It's about advertising. It's about stories that are brand safe. And that basically means that, hey, it won't be that controversial, but it will at least fill the hole at 6 p.m., at 5 p.m., and 4 p.m., and now 3 p.m. So there are more and more shows, fewer resources, but at the same time, journalists are now being asked to do way more with way less. And I pretty much was on my way out anyway of this, from this crazy mainstream media cycle that I've been in. So I'm really thankful that I've been able to have this incredible soft landing at Discovery Institute to continue my work that I was doing anyway. Again, as I said, I like to touch the third rail. I like to be provocative, but it's because I want to start these important conversations in our communities that are just not happening, quite frankly, for whatever reason. This is like the most polarized time I've ever seen in this entire country in my entire career. I've never seen it like this. Again, in Boston, I consider myself a JFK Democrat liberal, where I watched lawmakers growing up, in Boston, crossing the aisle, shaking hands, making deals, talking. I moved to Seattle. I'm lumped in now as a conservative Trump supporter. I mean, it's crazy what's going on. It's so extreme out here in the Pacific Northwest that it's just so polarized. If you don't agree with people, you get canceled. And I'm just so sick and tired of that. I'm sick and tired of people telling me what I can report on, what I can say. So I'm in the best situation possible right now.
I think you need to get emotional about it or worked up about it.
They say I need to be a little bit more
stop sugarcoating it and get to the point.
That's why you didn't have enough passion. That was what was wrong with you.
Well, so let's go back a little bit. What is Discovery Institute? What does a senior fellow do? And then we'll get to your main.
And why are you allowed to do stuff there that the other reporters are not allowed to do? What's different there?
Well, first of all, you should talk to my president because those are all questions for him. I've only been there for 3.5 months, but all joking aside, Discovery Institute is a think tank that's been in Seattle now for decades, quietly toiling away, putting out reports on interesting policy issues. And just in the past few years, they started this unit called Fix Homelessness. The website is fixhomelessness.org, and that's where you can primarily see my work. And, when I ended up on the street after my time at Como, the president immediately reached out to me, Steve Burai, great guy. And he was looking for someone like me to join the team, to continue the work on the homeless crisis, not only in Seattle, but across the country. Because frankly, there just aren't that many people doing this, just dedicated to this beat. So that's why they picked me up. And I had some opportunities to leave Seattle, maybe go back to Boston, New York, East Coast, get back into mainstream media. I was looking at some top 10 markets, you know, that hustle and how that all goes. But I'm like, why not just stay here for the next year? So it's a 1-year fellowship. And again, I get to take, again, deeper dives. I get to pull the PDRs. I get to do investigative work. It's not just about the daily grind, hitting my live shot at 4, 5, and 6 that I was doing at Como News. And look, for the record, I have no ill will towards Como. It's been 4+ months now, and I love my colleagues. I still stay in touch there, but they're now looking at my Twitter feed for story ideas. They're now coming to me, asking me for my sources. So I still try to help. It's really a collegial atmosphere in this Seattle market. But look, I don't need to tell you guys, just look at what's being pumped out by the local mainstream affiliates in Seattle versus what we're trying to do at Discovery Institute. And it's night and day. Nobody's doing what we're doing at this point. I want to be very clear. There are people covering the homeless crisis on the print side and the independent side, and that's great. But what we're really trying to focus on is the video-driven narrative. That is the key. Video don't lie.
So what have you, now that you've been able to take a deeper dive, what have you discovered? What are some of the most interesting things that you have learned and that you have shared with the people who are following you as a result of being able to do better reporting?
Well, look, there's a tremendous lack of accountability. Look, as you guys know, journalists, we were at one point looked at as the fourth estate, right? The watchdogs in our communities. And that is in dire straits right now. We know about the Great Resignation. You have some of the best journalists who are quitting now or just retiring. And these markets, like a dynamic market like Seattle, one of the fastest growing, it's market number 11 when it comes to the TV side. It's home to Microsoft, Amazon, it's known as the Hollywood of video gaming, home to Nintendo, Pokemon. You have some of the most important companies here, most important storylines, and they're just not being covered. So anyway, getting back to your question about what have I been able to do here? Well, I think what I've been able to do that I haven't been able to do when it comes to the mainstream is have more time. It's the time to go further into these stories, also build relationships and sources. I know a lot of times our viewers, they just look at the end result, the final product, but there is a process there, right? We know how the sausage is made. How many times have you guys been in these situations where you just wanted to spend a little bit more time out on a story, hang out with a source, or, stay overnight and get embedded somewhere? I'm able to do all those things. So a story I recently broke, which is still shocking to me how the mainstream media here in Seattle is not covering the story, is that there are these mutual aid volunteers. Okay, they call themselves Stop the Sweep Seattle. Okay, they have it's not quite a nonprofit, but they're a bunch of volunteers. They've mobilized on social media. They're in places like Portland. They're in other West Coast cities, and what they're trying to do is essentially stop the encampment removals that are happening at a furious pace in places like Seattle and places like San Francisco at times, in LA, and so on and so forth. And a story that I uncovered because I followed pretty much every single encampment sweep in Seattle for the past 2 months is that the mayor has a new homelessness policy to clear encampments, but then encourage the homeless to take shelter and service options. What I uncovered is that the vast majority of the homeless are refusing shelter and service options. And what's happening is that Stop the Sweep Seattle is shuttling the homeless who are refusing to other neighborhoods, creating the same problems for a new neighborhood.
Yeah, they come in. I was watching your stories. They come in,
Yeah.
they move out this encampment, and then they just move down the street or over towards near Starbucks. I saw the Starbucks headquarters.
Yeah.
And they're helping. But the homeless people were making the point that, I can't bring my cat, or they're not offering enough. The system isn't set up to these, but that the city's offering isn't sufficient enough. And so it's just moving it from one place to the other. They're just reshuffling the deck.
We also recognize that in LA. Our daughter lives in LA, and we were there during COVID, and homelessness obviously spiked hugely. And we went down an area that, you could just Google, and it said Skid Row. And we went down this street, and then literally probably 6 months later, it was gone. It was literally somewhere else. And I was like, whoa, what happened? There were like hundreds of people in this one area. So this is not just happening in Seattle, it's happening everywhere around the country, right?
Yeah. And let me be very clear. What's happening in terms of moving the homeless from one neighborhood to another, there's nothing illegal about that. That's perfectly legal. But the problem and the controversy is that it's undercutting the mayor's policy to get the homeless off the streets and on this journey to finally, get back really into society. And what has been underreported in Seattle is that the deputy mayor, Tiffany Washington, is running point on the homeless response. And she said on the record at the end of May, when they first announced this plan in Seattle, that the reason they're not publicly releasing the sweep schedule, you would think that's reasonable, right? Neighbors want to know, hey, when's my neighborhood going to be cleared of all these tents? The deputy mayor said, we're not releasing the schedule because protesters have disrupted. And we want to get ahead of that and make sure they don't show up. The problem is that a lot of these agencies that do outreach, that work in tandem with the county and city, they're compromised. They're leaking the schedule. Somebody is leaking the schedule to stop the sweep Seattle. So they're there anyway. And this is happening. So it's this vicious cycle the city is now in, and there's no end in sight. And there are no immediate answers. And again, getting back to the accountability piece, I'm hammering the mayor. I'm contacting the city council pretty much every single day. What is going on? What are you guys going to do about this? Are you just going to keep on just sweeping and just do it until this culture forms or people just get tired of moving around? No response. But maybe that's what they're thinking, but I don't know. This goes back to what is a reasonable expectation for the public from elected officials, these public servants, to get clear answers. And that's what I'm trying to demand and get for neighbors, the community here in Seattle through my reporting.
Well, it's an unfolding problem, though, as well. I mean, why is there so much homelessness? And then it's become a red and blue issue. Why is it in sort of democratically run cities, or at least that's what, the MAGA types will have you believe? What's the cause of it? And then maybe you can figure out how to deal with it.
That's an age-old question, man. All I know is it's biblical, right? I mean, it's been homelessness, the poor, poverty. It's been with us since the beginning of age. So I don't know what to tell you about that. At least fast forward to now here in America. There are all kinds of reasons. I mean, look, depending on which lawmaker you ask, you'll have folks saying it's about affordable housing or the lack thereof. It's about housing first. If we build more housing, we're going to help the homeless get off the streets. We need millions, billions more dollars. Okay. Then you'll have another camp saying it's the drugs, it's the mental illness. That's the root of all of this. Based on my reporting in the short amount of time I've been here in Seattle, I mean, maybe the easy answer right now is, but it's not necessarily something that may lead to immediate solutions, is it's a combination of all of the above. But what I'm seeing right now is really people out there. I'm out there every single day. And this is what I wasn't able to do when I was in mainstream media. That's to literally build relationships, friendships with these people who say they are choosing to be on the streets because they want to do the drugs. They have families to go back to, but so many families are showing tough love. They want their sons and daughters back so badly, but not as fentanyl addicts, right? So these users are staying on the streets. It's heartbreaking story after heartbreaking story. We're just gonna stay out here. We'll take our chances. We just love the drugs. If you get off the drugs, it hurts so much. I mean, these are the same talking points you've heard over and over from drug users. So in the meantime, what do we do as a culture, as a society? Do we just allow this? Do we just watch these people overdose? I mean, one of our senators recently, Patty Murray, Democratic senator here in Washington, testified recently saying that the police chief in Seattle, fire chief in Seattle, told her that they're seeing at least 4 overdoses every single week. 4 overdoses from illegal drugs like fentanyl and Percocets, all kind of oxycodone. I mean, it's just out of control. And we're just watching, standing by, allowing this. That's what blows my mind. I don't have the answers, guys. I'm just reporting on what I'm seeing. And this is the heartbreaking stuff now. Now, as a citizen, what can I do? What do I do? So what I've also been doing is, aside from reporting, I take off my journalist hat and I've been trying to figure out, how can I help this woman or this man, one person at a time, at least get started on this journey off the streets, off the drugs. And I think at this point, that's what I'm trying to do.
How do you do that? How do you help them get started?
You let them know that you care about them. You let them know that, you ask them what their name is. You ask them their story. You'd be shocked. You guys, well, maybe not. You guys are former journalists. You actually take the time to stop and talk to a panhandler. You'll be surprised because the vast majority of people don't. And when you stop and genuinely ask them, what's your story? What can I do to help? Are you ready if I take you to a shelter? What if I bring an outreach worker out here? You'll be surprised at how many times people open up. And once you build that trust, when you show up consistently over and over and again, like I do, and they know now I'm a journalist out there just documenting their story, they start to trust you. And I have been able to, just in the past 3-4 months now, being on the sidelines, transitioning to Discovery Institute, I've been, personally connecting with some ministries, some nonprofits, and I've been directing people to those places, and I've been tracking some of their stories. And that's another series that's going to be coming up, by the way.
Yeah, so, I was just going to say, it sounds like you have a documentary ready to go.
I do. That's another story for another day. That's down the line. But I'm tracking some of the people that I built relationship with to find out where they end up going. Because that's another key piece, right? The city and the county will follow a homeless person into the intake. But after that, what happens? Very few right now are being tracked, and many end up back on the streets.
Do you have a short example of a story that really touched you?
I mean, I just did this incredible series of the homeless now retreating into the woods, right? Because it's cooler, it's out of sight, out of mind. And I just met this woman from Los Angeles, and she admitted to be a heroin user, but she was so talented. She came here to be a musician. Life happened, and I just asked her to play solo. And I'm like, oh my gosh, these people have so much potential. Her playing was incredible. She could be playing right now, concert, but she's choosing the streets for various reasons, broken relationships, addiction. Of course, there's probably mental illness as well. And she just prefers to be out there, and she wants the freedom right now. And that to me was probably one of the most touching, at the same time, heartbreaking situations. And it's just so frustrating. I can't imagine her father, her mother, what they must be thinking right now. My baby girl with so much potential can still play the guitar, and she's out here doing the drugs.
So the reporting that you've done now, has it led to any public policy change, or do you hope that it will lead to public policy change? Because I don't know, like I often wonder what these politicians are thinking. Just like, do they not know the answers? So they just think the answer is pushing the problem off to another neighborhood for a fight for another day. I mean, it makes no sense.
Look, in fairness, what's happening in Seattle is a sea change. There's a new mayor who's been in office now for about half a year, Mayor Bruce Harrell. There's a city attorney who, Ann Davison. She's like the first Republican to be elected in Seattle since like the 1980s. I mean, that's significant. So, going from this activist, socialist, far left atmosphere for the past couple of years now, Seattle's kind of going back more towards the middle. They're looking for moderates, right? Because even the liberals and the progressives, they're starting to realize, wait, crime, homelessness now on my doorstep, that's becoming a problem. Okay, let's forget about the far left fringe voices for a moment. Let's now start to look at the reasonable majority. So Seattle is shifting. They are still hopeful in the new administration. Sweeps continue. Stuff is getting done. But the question now is, what's working and what's not? What's sustainable and what's not? And it's still way too early to tell right now, because there have been some success stories in certain spots of Seattle. For example, the downtown core. For the most part, it's clear of tents. But again, where did all those tents go? Did the homeless actually go into shelter? And did they start the journey to get off the streets? Or did they just move to another neighborhood? And that piece is not being clearly tracked. That data is not available right now, at least from city officials and from the county. Also, getting back to your question, in terms of, ultimately what is being done in terms of policy change. All I know is they're watching my work. The lawmakers are watching my work. Has it actually led to tangible results? I mean, I don't know. All I know is they're looking at my work right now, at least, and I'm only speaking from my time at the Discovery Institute now for the past 3 months, but they're watching my work and I'm highlighting, and there's no way to ignore these inconvenient truths. And I can't tell you enough, dependence on just mainstream media, the television stations in town, that's not happening anymore. The power of social media, independent journalism, guys, man, it is such an exciting time. I was talking about the dire state of journalism, but I can tell you right now, and maybe I'm biased. I'm independent now. That's what I consider myself as a fellow at this think tank, because I have autonomy to cover whatever I want, pretty much. But it is an exciting time, especially with all these new platforms emerging. I mean, look at this podcast you guys are pulling off. This is another avenue to get information out, to get conversation started, and also to start influencing these lawmakers, at the very least, shining a light on really what's happening out there. I hope that answers your question.
These are two anecdotal things, but when Kathy had talked about LA, and one of the things we heard was that other cities are shipping their homeless to LA and warmer cities. Is
you
that
get a one-way ticket?
Yeah, they get. It's sort of like
COVID.
Sort of like what Abbott did with the buses and the people coming in over the border. Is that anecdotal? Is that crap? Is that real?
I can tell you right now, I want to do that story so badly. We're trying to figure out how to pull that off. It's not only anecdotal. I believe it's really happening because I talked to a lot of folks here in Seattle on the street, and they're not from Seattle. So how they got here, I'm not sure. Did another lawmaker or governor from another state pay for them, or did some nonprofit pay for them to move to Seattle, Portland, Los Angeles, or San Francisco? I don't know. I don't have that data and proof. I haven't done that reporting, but just Google. There are other reports. I mean, from Texas, Austin, San Antonio, city officials sending the homeless to these West Coast cities. I want to get into that story. I would love to show the journey, right? Starting from one of these states here to a West Coast city. But, I have no doubt that that's happened. But right now, I can firmly say there are many people who have just moved to Seattle in the past 2-3 years because they say it's more lax, more open to the homeless. There are so many social services out here, and it's an easier climate to live in 24/7, 365 days a year, rather than a place like Chicago, which has a homeless crisis, but it's not as, out there as a place like San Francisco or Los Angeles or Seattle or Portland.
Yeah. Another thing we heard was that, during COVID, and you probably have met people like this, but there were professionals, attorneys who lost their jobs, and then bad things happened and ended up on the streets. I mean, you wouldn't believe the backgrounds, we were told, of many of the people that they were
probably met some of those people, like really talented people who, like you said, the musician, but probably, white collar workers, lawyers, accountants, whatever. During COVID, probably a lot of people saw the same.
Oh yeah, look, as we all know, there's no one size fits all when it comes to being homeless. You have one, spectrum where you have someone like that just for whatever reason didn't have a social safety net. Life happens. They were working. Next thing you know, 2 months later, they're on the street for whatever reason. But they're more likely to get off the streets, right? Because they're hungry, they're fighting, they still have all their faculties. They don't necessarily have an addiction. So they're easier to help. Then you have the other spectrum of just so far gone, mental illness, drug addiction, just used to being on the streets. You just don't know if someone like this can be saved, essentially. So again, I think it's so important right now to say that I've seen, I believe, the spectrum of homelessness on the streets here in Seattle. But yeah, I think on that note, one story of a guy I met just a couple months ago in this neighborhood in Seattle called Ballard. He was living at an encampment. His name is Ben. And I regret losing track of him because of the sweeps. He moved from one encampment to another, and I was following him, and I don't know where he ended up. But he told me he was a chemist. And he was brilliant, just well-spoken, eloquent. I remember he had this really severe, his hand was swollen because he got into a fight the night before and his cell phone got stolen. I'm like, Ben, what's going on? You're a chemist. You're a college professor, he says at one point. And he goes, yeah, the divorce really wrecked me. And then it led to the drinking. And then it led to the finances being drained. And then the options, ran out. Then his social network turned on him. There are multiple sides to every story. I'm sure mistakes were made on his end as well. And he ended up on the streets. And now he's caught in this, cycle of homelessness. And and when you talk about, these attorneys losing their jobs during the pandemic, or people who were professionals and for whatever reason are on the streets, absolutely that's happening. And Ben is a perfect example of that. This guy who's absolutely brilliant, who just seemed to have life circumstances happen. Then he started making choices that brought him further down this rabbit trail. There are so many stories like that in this country that we don't even know about, that aren't that are undocumented right now.
Do you, in your reporting, have you been able to interview experts or people who have some answers, or who think there are some things that we should be trying? Because it seems like there's so many people trying to solve this problem, and so many smart different organizations. Like, couldn't they all come together and figure it out? I mean, it's a super complex problem, right? It's mental health, it's housing crisis, it's COVID, obviously, it's drug addiction. I mean, it's multifaceted, right? But we have really smart people who can come together and tackle this. Why can't we? Or who was working on it that we could look to for some hope?
I think what you're referring to is the homeless industrial complex. This problem is just too big to fail. I don't believe that we're going to see this ever solved in our lifetimes. And it's here to stay. It's now about mitigation. It's about getting as many people as possible off the streets and essentially trying to control it from getting out of control. And yeah, you're absolutely right. There are so many smart people, nonprofits, billions of dollars thrown at this. And yet there is no end in sight. And it just seems to be getting worse. And yeah,
I report because people are making money off of, like I always
say the homeless industrial complex.
Well, right, yeah, I know, but yeah. I look cynically at the pharmaceutical industry. I'm like, why isn't there cures for things? We spend so much money, and then you go, well, is it more profitable to cure something, or is it more profitable to come up with a drug and treat something for life? Right. Like,
that's
so I'm
right.
a
Maintenance medication versus actual cures for the pharmaceutical industry. No, you don't want a cure. You want a pill that someone takes for the rest of their life, so you can make millions of dollars off that person.
Yeah. So is that the same thing with homelessness? That's what you're saying? Like, there's just too much money to be had along the way, that no one's really actually trying to solve the problem?
I mean, again, it depends who you ask. Personally, I would think that's really insidious and sinister for people to have that type of motive. Look, at the end of the day, I don't know what's inside a man's heart and what's inside a woman's heart. But I think there are good orgs out there. They're good people. I'd like to think the vast majority are, but they're also, I'm sure, no doubt some there just to line their own pockets. You start to wonder, why is, a CEO or an executive at a homeless nonprofit making $300,000, $400,000? I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to judge. It's not my place either to say how much someone should make or not, or what somebody's worth. But yeah, this has really become a multi-billion-dollar industry. And there are people doing very well. Are the homeless being helped? Yeah, sure, no doubt. Some are. But in terms of an actual answer, a cure, I don't see it coming to an end anytime soon. And I want to quickly answer your question about, why can't the smartest people put their minds together and figure this out? Well, it's also because so many of them have different approaches to what they think the answer is. And I've reported on this, and it is absolutely wild. There is a nonprofit in Seattle that just started during the pandemic, only 2 years old. It's called We Heart Seattle, probably one of the most effective homeless nonprofits, because what they do is it's grassroots. It's about mobilizing the community, right? It's not just relying on the professionals or the policymakers or public officials. It's actually figuring out ways to mobilize neighbors so they go out and clear encampments. And get this, then they go and build relationships with the homeless and get the homeless to clean up the encampments. Then they take the next step to build a closer relationship to finally say, Bob, Jenny, are you ready? You know we love you. You know you're making progress. And this, they call it boots on the ground, one-on-one. And this model has been working and has been successful in the short time that this nonprofit's been around. Yet the far left, the activists like Stop the Sweep Seattle, are consistently hammering this nonprofit because Stop the Sweeps and the mutual aid and the far left groups will say, you're disturbing somebody's homeless encampment. Let them be in the garbage. Stay there. And then when I ask, well, when should we move the homeless or have them, take the next step in life? When they're ready. So what does ready mean? When a studio or an apartment is available. I'm like, what? A studio and apartment is the only time, which goes back to this insanity of housing first, the socialism ultimately. And again, depends who you ask, who you want to believe. But there are people in Seattle, in this country, who want the encampments to remain because it shows that capitalism is not working. It shows that it's failed. They want to destabilize and ultimately start a revolution. Again, I don't want to go down the conspiracy theory holes. All I know is I'm talking to my people on the ground here in Seattle who are part of these, socialist and communist communities. Oh, absolutely, they exist. And they want the encampments to remain. And so you have so many different groups with so many different approaches clashing. And there's
not just approaches, but agendas, right? Because that other group, is their agenda helping the homeless people, or is their agenda proving a point, right? Like they have a different agenda, and it may not be homeless.
And you have folks who want to keep the homeless out there so they can continue to line their pockets and pay their people to keep on doing the outreach with no end in sight. And then you have others who want to ultimately just cure it, right? And help people, get off the street. So, and there's no clearinghouse. Right? This is America. You have free will choice. There's no, official, registration. You need to go out and help a homeless person. So nonprofits are being started every single day for all kinds of reasons. It's just wild. I mean, that's another story for another day as well, right, guys? How easy would it be to start a homeless nonprofit, and how much money could you make? I have no doubt that's happening.
Do you, I saw where you uncovered the video where the guy attacked the guy in the wheelchair and killed him. You want to tell that story?
Yeah, it's just an absolutely heartbreaking story. A homeless man simply sitting in his wheelchair in Bellevue. It's a city 10 minutes from Seattle. It is one of the most affluent. And it was in an area with these high-end shops. It was right across the street from the police station and City Hall. But it was, a little past midnight, and you just see this guy coming up to the man sitting in the wheelchair and just wailing on him, punching him in the head, knocking him out of his wheelchair, then stomping on his head for good measure, and then simply walking away. Truly a maniac. Thankfully, he was arrested. The perpetrator was arrested, and he's now facing several charges, including first-degree murder. Unfortunately, the surveillance video did not have any audio. So prosecutors say at this point, it looks to be unprovoked. But yeah, this is, this story, ultimately, what it did for me was just continue to show the dangers as well that the homeless are facing. I think a lot of people, depending, again, who you are, what side you're on, may think the homeless, are all criminals. That's not true. Many of them are the victims. And they're in these tough circumstances. And like this man in his 60s, who was, on a fixed income and simply there. Again, we don't know why he was there at that hour of the day. There's still so many unanswered questions. He was well known in Bellevue's homeless community, stayed at a local shelter, and it just rocked the community. But again, another reminder that the homeless continue to be targets. They're vulnerable. A lot of times they're the victims, and they get taken advantage of by the drug dealers, by the pimps, by just these insane, violent acts.
Do you ever fear for your safety?
If I said no, I'd be lying. But that's why, I've gone out many times. Look, you've got to be smart first and foremost, and always keep your head on a swivel. But depending on the situation, I'm not going to go into something insane. I have access to a security guard, and I've gone into these encampments or, protest situations with security guards when I've needed to go in with one. But look, yeah, is there a risk? No doubt. But at the same time, I'm not stupid. At any moment, can a situation get out of control? Yeah, absolutely. I try to, eject as soon as possible if I see a situation spiraling out of control. But again, I go in there slowly, cautiously. It's about building trust in relationships. If people trust you and they know you're really there to just tell their story in a fair and accurate way, like journalists are supposed to, and your motive is there to really just simply spotlight, what's happening. I think for the most part, you'll be fine. But right now, you have a lot of mainstream outlets who aren't going into these situations and covering these stories because of that very same reason, right?
Is that there? Because you have really good stations in Seattle.
Yeah, well, here's the worst kept secret. A lot of these stations have unions. And when I was at Como, and this is a fact, and I'll just say it, the photogs refused to go into homeless encampments without security. And towards the end, they refused to go out with me because I was pushing the envelope. I kept going into these places. I was getting the stories, but they were fearful, and justifiably so. In fairness, I get it. I mean, you don't know what you're going to encounter in a homeless encampment. You just don't know. It's a mix, right? Like the spectrum of homeless. It's a spectrum in these encampments. You don't know. You have these trap tents. That's a fact. These tents that are being used by drug dealers. They want you to think that a homeless person's living in there, but they're running drugs out of there. You have trap tents in these places. You have prostitution happening. Oh, the heartbreaking stories of so many prostitutes, these sex workers who I've met at these encampments. I just haven't been able to show it because, they don't want to be interviewed. And I know the pimp is watching. So I've got to be really careful too about what I show and how I approach and so on and so forth. But, oh yeah, you have everyone who's ready, who just wants that tiny house, who's ready to get off the streets, to folks who are intentionally there taking advantage of the homeless. Heartbreaking.
So we know your immediate goal is to shine a spotlight on this. What's the ultimate goal?
Solutions. I don't want to just spotlight and shine a light on this. I want real change, even if it's one person at a time. When all is said and done, if I've seen one person, one man, one woman get off the streets and get back into society or reunite with a family member, I know that I fulfilled my call, and that's what I really believe. I'm doing this just kind of a higher calling for me. Look, I could go into any industry I want. I mean, I've had other offers. By the way, I've been, I've parted ways with several stations now for various reasons. I left the industry 3 times. So if I go back into mainstream media, even after this, and I'll never say never, right? As of right now, I don't see myself back in mainstream, and I like what I'm doing now. But, I've left the industry several times and I've jumped back in for whatever reason. But again, I'm in a season right now where I feel like I'm here for a reason. I'm seeing things and showing things that others are not. And if I'm not the one doing it, as we know, it's almost like it never happened, right? I mean, that's what's so wild about this. And that's when public officials can say, oh, everything's fine here, nothing to see, move along. And that is what infuriates me the most, when elected officials say, oh, look, Seattle's great, oh, Portland's great, San Fran's great. I'm like, no, it's not. Here's what's really happening because of your policies. And that's what I want to continue to showcase.
And I think most people, that's where they don't understand journalists. Most true people who are true journalists, not just people who want to be on TV, want to be famous, they're going in there because they want to, they want to create change. They want to shine a light. They want to show the unfairness of, or what's not happening, expose, corruption or crime or whatever. And so, journalists get a bad rap by people who want to, say that we're on X side or, Y side or Z side. No, we're not on sides. We're on the sides of trying to make a difference. And that's what it sounds like you're able to do. How long will you be able to stay at Discovery Institute for longer than, I know you said you had a year fellowship or whatever. Do you see staying longer and covering other issues?
Well, It's really depends. I was asked that question as well by my president, when he brought me on, and he said, "How long do you want to stay?" I said, "Let's take it year by year. Let's see where this goes." I don't know where this is going to go. So far, so good. But I want to also say we're a nonprofit, and we all know how the media industry works, right? It's based off of advertising. Newspapers at one point before Craigslist, it was all classifieds, right? Fueling it. That's why the newspaper industry right now is in a free fall. Television stations right now rely still primarily on local advertising, but a lot of it is right now being fueled by retrans fees. Retrans fees, you can Google it, but they're basically getting money from the cable providers, but people are cutting the cord. So the TV industry, who knows how long it's going to stick around with this current model, but it's being squeezed, right? Because most of the television stations now are not independent. They're not owned by mom and pops. They're owned by the Nextstars, the Tegnas, the Sinclairs, these massive corporate conglomerates, Disney, Fox, Comcast, Viacom owning all of these big time players in these local markets. So at the end of the day, they're beholden to their shareholders, not the audience, not the community. So, I feel like journalism is at a very, once again, another crossroads. But getting back to Discovery, we're a nonprofit, so I have to raise funding to stay here. That was my long-winded setup to say we're a nonprofit, and I have enough to get by for I think the next few months, next year at least. But after that, and even now, I have to continue to look for ways to raise funding to continue this work. But I also decided to take this risk and gamble because it's also an opportunity for me to not only tackle stories that are not being covered in the community, but also test out and try out new models to fund and sustain journalism, right? And I love how right now you have the Patreon model, you have subscription models that certain independent journalists are using, Substack, so on and so forth. I want to try other crowdfunding models as well, maybe to launch a story. If you want to see, here's a crazy idea I've been thinking about. I don't know how I'm going to pull it off, but hey, 3 important stories this week. If you want it funded, the one that can raise the most money is the one that gets launched. I mean, things like that. I mean, this is such an interesting time. I feel like you not only have to, be a journalist, but you also have to really think like an entrepreneur now as well, because you're really on your own if you want to do your work.
I think so many people didn't realize like how local news got started. I mean, when you were a station, you had to dedicate X amount to public service, to news. And then all of a sudden, a lot of these local news organizations went, oh, wow, this is a moneymaker. We can make money off that. And then anytime you infuse money into a situation, well, then the quality can go down because then the money is the driver and not the reason for existing.
Oh yeah, and there's so much lobbying happening behind the scenes with in front of the Federal Communications Commission right now. You have a lot of these television station ownership groups lobbying, constantly trying to deregulate or essentially loosen up the laws and this oversight, so they can continue to do more of the profit making instead of really using their platforms as a public service. So very interesting times. I don't know where this is all going to go. I don't have all the answers, which is also why I'm still a journalist at the end of the day.
So what happened? Tell us, you were at Como, which is a legendary station. Was it 12th Market, you said, right?
11.
Seattle?
11.
11.
And I'm glad you added that qualifier. Was a legendary station.
And you were covering the protest.
A Proud Boys rally.
Yes.
It was really a rally. It wasn't even a protest necessarily. It was a march through Olympia, Washington, the state's capital.
Yeah. All right. So pick it up. Tell what happened.
Yeah, no, I've shared I've shared this story now dozens of times. It made national news, and
this will be the best telling right here. This will be the best place.
Yeah, this is like version 50 now, so you'll get
It'll
a
be
little
shorter
bit more.
and sweeter.
Yeah,
shorter and sweeter.
You got a minute 15. Wrap it up. Let's go.
Yeah, basically, I went on the weekend on my time off. And it's because I knew it could potentially be a big story. Last year, an Antifa member shot at a Proud Boy. And of course, we all know the Proud Boys. They've been implicated in January 6th Capitol insurrection. And I wanted to know as a journalist, who are these people? What is the, big deal? And I go and, at Como, we covered dozens of Antifa rallies, the far left destroying the city and trashing police, vehicles. So I wanted to find out who these Proud Boys were. And what it turned into was, maybe 50 folks just marching around Olympia, peaceful, quiet. Grandmas were there. And it wasn't all white. You had Blacks, Asians, Latinos, male, female, some children were there as well. And I simply was live tweeting. I want to be very clear. None of this made air. And it was on my time off. But a little video montage, as you guys remember, a Nat Sound package, just with some photos and audio, that I heard blaring from one of the speakers of a marcher. I put this montage together, and immediately the far left, and I put it on Twitter, and the far left seized on that and accused me of, essentially perpetuating Proud Boys propaganda. And they started an online coordinated campaign to inundate Como with phone calls saying Jonathan Choe needs to be fired. So the next day, my news director, I kept it up. My news director said, hey, this is crazy. You need to take down that video. So I took everything down. I wanted to leave it up. I was like, what's the big deal? I didn't do anything wrong. I'm not saying the Proud Boys are the best or right and one side is right or another. This is literally what happened. And then the following day, my news director and GM brought me in the office, says, hey, we got to part ways. And I said, okay, fine. The backstory here is that I only had 2.5 weeks left until my out clause was kicking in at Como. So I think it made it a little easier for them. I already told my bosses I was going to explore my options, just negotiations, right? So I think that factored in as well, but ultimately they caved. Como caved to the pressure from the far left. And that's what ultimately, took me on this journey. And it's been a blessing in disguise. And I stand by everything. Could I have presented it differently? Probably. Would I have, not gone if, I had to do it all over again? I would have gone. Absolutely. That story needed to be covered. People have said, huh, would you have not gone? No, absolutely. That's what journalists do. You have to cover these stories and you have to show all sides.
Why
And that's
was
the problem.
Because they perceived it to be pro Proud Boys? Is that was?
Yeah. The far left, they created their narrative online. See, that's why the far left, they're so sophisticated. They understand tech. And I joke around with my buddies in the media. I'm like, the conservatives, they're idiots. They can't figure out Parler. They're like beholden to the tech community, the liberals, the far left. You got to understand tech. So you can create your own ecosystem and your own platforms. But yeah, the far left essentially used social media and they mobilized their base. It was incredible. It was fascinating. It was like this. I was watching, again, part of society I've never seen, operate this way. So it was a learning experience for me as well to see how social media is now so powerful and can sway not only public opinion, but obviously policy decisions and also decisions by news directors.
And turn a liberal, considered liberal Democrat into some crazy conservative that they were you out to be.
I'm now a conservative Trump supporter, apparently. So.
Oh gosh. Well, so
wait a minute. So
I'm an independent for the record. I'm an independent and a moderate.
Yes.
Do you think, though, I mean, we've all been fired from the news business or in the news business. Do you think they were just looking for a reason to get rid of you and you handed it to them?
I don't think so. Again, I don't know if I'll ever know that answer. I've not heard back from my news director or general manager. You're going to have to ask them. They just put out a quick statement and that was it. I refuse to allow this, false narrative, this fake news to go around. So, I believe I took back the story and I stand by everything that I've said up to this point. And now I'm starting my new journey at Discovery Institute. I'm doing the best journalism that I've done in my entire career.
So what do you think about journalism when, obviously I have, we probably share a lot of viewpoints on the good, the bad, the ugly about journalism. But one of the things, how should they handle, like when you have these groups who are so outside the norm, right? And so should they be ignoring them because talking about them and showing what they're doing is giving them fuel and giving them exposure that, it used to be like in school shooters, right? Like we used to say the name of the mass school shooters. And then all of a sudden they realized the media was like, wait a minute, well, they want notoriety. So now it's creating more school shooters because they want to be like Dylan from Columbine or whatever. So now the media decides we're not talking about we're not giving them like the heroism or whatever they need, although they're still getting it on the dark web. So how should journalists handle some of the Steve Bannons and the super radical right or left, either one? Should you ignore them? Should you pay attention to them? Should you cover them? Like how should journalism, I mean, get from a philosophical viewpoint, how should we be handling that?
Yeah, I think it all depends. It depends on your news organization. It depends on the values. But you talked about a lot of the older kind of values that traditional newsrooms had. My question, first of all, is who determined that standard? It's like, as journalists, we just take orders, right? But like, my question is, says who? Who determined that, and why? What's the reason? You ask most newsroom managers, they can't even answer that question. So we just kind of go along with the flow, and that's just the way it is. So I'm the type of person who questions that. But fast forward to now, that ship has sailed. You can get all that information on social media now. And that's where most, I believe consumers now, they did this study, the next generation coming up, they're getting their news now on not even Facebook, it's Instagram and TikTok.
Yeah.
Okay. Those are the places they're getting their news sources. So in terms of gatekeepers, the clearinghouse, the vetting, it's a free-for-all now, guys. So, look, if you're a traditional newsroom and you want to institute and you've had those values for all these years, and like you said, for that reason, hey, we don't want to give more notoriety to these shooters, we don't want copycats, cat's out of the bag, too late. It's still happening. So with that said, I'm in the camp where it's on a case-by-case situation. You've got to just really use your own judgment and your own wisdom as to, we learned this in J School, Journalism 101. It's about minimizing harm, right? You don't want to, just do something for the sake of doing it. You've got to have a reason. And at the same time, if you do choose to put out a name or certain details or cover a certain group, I think we owe it to our viewers, our readers, our listeners. You got to explain why, right? And I think if you add that, reason, every time, I think your audience will respect that. And whether they agree with you or not, at the very least, they'll know why now. And I think that type of, I'm all about conversation, discourse, giving people reasons why. You don't have to agree with me every single time, but here's why I'm doing it. And I think that's important, instead of just going with the flow, just because that's the way we've always done it. That's the type of stuff that bothers me.
And should news organizations also maybe put the curtain or show people behind the curtain about the how we go about getting stories? Because, if you're a true journalist, you're not just like, I mean, the people who are news hosts, there's so many people who are labeled journalists who are not really journalists. Sean Hannity is not a journalist, of course, except when he wants to be a journalist because it helps him in court or whatever. But you know what I mean? Like, there are certain people I think the public needs to know who a journalist is and kind of what the rules are and how they work. And I mean, what are your thoughts about that?
I think we're just, again, in this time now where like these titles, these norms in media, these expectations we've always had, it's all out the door, man. It's like, it's a free for all. It's a shakeout that's happening. So all of these titles, what we used to do, is all being redefined. You have people who were once journalists now injecting opinion into everything. And you have people, like you said, who are just provocateurs and, hosts and opinion makers now claiming to do the journalism. And look, I don't want to limit people. This goes back to kind of my logic. It's like, who determines what you can do and not do? But it's all about saying what you're doing and being open about it. And if you want to just be a pure play journalist, look, we all have a bias. We all have a worldview and value systems, but at least try to be objective, right? And I think that's the biggest difference. You have people now who don't even try to be objective. And I still feel like I'm in that camp, right? I consider myself a journalist. I have an opinion. I've shared my opinion. But at the very least, at the end of the day, look at my work. Look at my track record. Look at what I'm producing. If you're seeing all sides represented, or at least an attempt, then I think you can still call me a journalist. That's my standard.
When I watched your pieces, I couldn't tell what side you're on.
Thank you. I guess that's a good thing.
Yeah, no, other than presenting the truth or presenting a great not even a snapshot, but whatever's bigger than a snapshot, a spotlight on the topic that you were covering that day. How often, where do people find you? And how did they find you?
Yeah, look, I'm most active on my Twitter right now. My handle is at Choe, CHOESHOW. That's where you can find a lot of my random daily thoughts and hot takes and video. Again, all of this is primarily video, but a lot of my pieces will end up on our website. It's fixhomelessness.org. Again, it's fixhomelessness.org. You can find news stories, multiple stories each week. And if you want to support us and support the work, we can use all the help that we can get, because right now it's just, a couple people running this, and we're trying to expand because we're realizing there's a need and there's a marketplace for this. People are hungry for this type of news, for this type of coverage that's just not being done by the mainstream press, especially locally here in Seattle, for all kinds of reasons.
Are you concentrating only on homelessness right now, or are you working on other stories, or is that?
Yeah, it's primarily my bread and butter every single day is the homeless crisis. But with the homeless crisis, there are offshoots of that, and there's crime, right, related to the homeless crisis. There's human trafficking, which is crime, and there's just all of these stories related. But I started off as a general assignment reporter early on in my career, so I still enjoy covering all kinds of issues in the community that matter. But right now, I feel like front and center, my priority again is the homeless crisis and everything else connected to it.
Well, keep up the amazing work. It's really, you blew my mind here today with everything that and let's hope that more people have their eyes open.
Well, first of all,
opened by you.
Hoping those policymakers are paying attention and start doing something as a result.
They're paying attention, but they're also trying to ignore. But it's hard to ignore the video and social media. When these videos and stories take off, they take off. So at a certain point, accountability needs to happen.
Fixhomelessness.org at Choe Show. And can we Heart Seattle? You like them, so we can mention them.
They're an incredible nonprofit, and I love Union Gospel Mission here in Seattle, Reach Ministry. There are just a lot of great nonprofits doing work, whether they're faith-based or not. But those are the three that I've primarily worked very closely with, and I've had incredible access because of the inroads and relationships they've built here in the community here in Seattle, and the trust and credibility they have.
Are you going to expand to other cities like LA, San Francisco?
Yeah, I did a piece in my hometown of Boston in June. My next trip is going to be to Spokane, Washington. After that, we're going to San Francisco, and we are coming to LA, Portland. We're going to Chicago. We're going to be looking at other models. We're not just there to spotlight the problem. We're trying to find solutions. What's working, what's not.
Well,
we'll be watching. That's awesome.
Continued success and keep going. And it's nice to see someone who doesn't shy away from anything. Reporters.
Hey, at this point, I've already been fired, so whatever. Who cares?
Now I've been fired, but now you're a MAGA crowd guy.
Yeah,
apparently, yeah. But like I said, just to be clear, I voted both Democrat and Republican, and I will continue to go down that road as an independent journalist.
Independent moderate. There you go. Yes,
independent moderate.
Who likes Star Wars. So that's anybody's watching on YouTube. That's what's behind you. Star Wars figures.
Yeah, that's my vice. My one vice.
Therapy.
I'm sure. Yes. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys, for reaching out. Appreciate the opportunity.
I don't even know where to start with him. He was. This guy.
Great if that's the way journalism could work from now on.
Yes. Yeah. And it is in a lot of ways, but
it's kind of scary when he said it's a free for all and people are getting their news everywhere. That's what I worry about, the vetting and people with not using critical thinking skills and not vetting who they're getting the information from. Like Jonathan is an amazing source and he's a reporter's reporter, but
and he's passionate.
Yeah. Not everybody is out there who's claiming to be a journalist. So
it was great talking with Jonathan. A lot to say, a lot of insight.
We'll We'll have him back. We need to have him.
Yeah, because he kept saying that's for another show. That's for another show. That's for another show. Okay, good. We'll book you. Okay. We hope you enjoyed this week's episode.
After Deadline, the media podcast is a production of On the Marc Media. If you enjoyed what you heard and want to hear more of our interviews with incredible journalists across the country, then be sure to follow us on social media at On the Marc Media and subscribe to After Deadline, the media podcast, wherever you normally get your favorite podcasts. Until next time, we'll catch up with you after Deadline.